And let's get to our next guest. Every Friday, I talk to Dr. Bridge Bombies with Centric Health. He's a local cardiologist with Central Cardiology, trying to make some sense. We try to stay in front of this coronavirus, kind of stay in front of the hype and all the noise to really talk about what are some of the serious trends and what should we be looking at going forward. Dr. Bombi, welcome back to the show, my friend. How are you?
I'm well, Richard. How are you?
Good. How do you, let me have, before we get into it, how do you deal with a weekend when it's going to be 110?
I complain. I submit an application that summer should be banned. Sometimes it should exceed the level. I do everything. Nothing works, Richard. So at the end of the day, you just shut up and you let it be.
There you go. You do what we do. You do what we do. And let's get to the coronavirus. Let me start here, if you don't mind, Dr. Bombi. There was yet more reports this week about how the virus is spread and how it's contracted, and a lot of speculation. And I believe there was at least one new study on when you're talking how long the droplets stay in the air and how far they can go. And I suppose this is relevant because we're talking about, this is the 6-foot rule enough if people aren't wearing masks? And that can apply to, I suppose, restaurants too. We may get through this thing and think 6 feet isn't enough. Maybe you need 10 feet. Is there any update on this, on droplet research?
So there has been a considerable contention about the mode of transmission. The one mode that was never in question was a droplet infection. So if you're close enough to a person and you're in the spitable distance, or if you're in the mouth odor distance, that tells you that infection can come with long enough contact. But what has been in debate is what if the particles become small and they get aerosolized, and the aerosols can travel. They can be captured by the HVAC system, by the ventilation system, and they can be recirculated. So what has happened over the last few months is in the University of Nebraska and Florida, they've been able to actually culture the air from up to 17 feet away from where a person has been, and they've been able to show that the virus is live and is able to infect in petri dishes. So what that raises the spectrum is, yes, you have to maintain separation, but what is the upper limit of separation? The upper limit of the separation is that if you are indoors where the ventilation is suspect, where you don't have the high efficiency filters or the ultraviolet germicidal adjuncts, the risk of infection exists in recirculated air. So the best strategy when you're indoors, the practical conclusion based on this is, if you're indoors, please wear the mask. Then don't go by the 6 feet rule, go by the masks, because you need that extra protection indoors when there are multiple people. Outdoors, the 6 feet rule still applies.
So, I mean, let me take this down. Let's say you live in a 3,000 square foot home, and somebody in the house is quarantined and has COVID, and you're in another part of the house. Should you be worried that because you're sharing the same air conditioning system and ventilation, that some of that could be airborne through the system and you could be exposed?
Yes, that is why in a lot of the countries around the world, they take the people with the infection and they isolate them in a different setting. So yes, technically speaking, that is true. And there are many instances. There was one, I think in China, there was an instance where half the restaurant got exposed by one person, and there were multiple people who were infected because a fan or AC was blowing the air towards a certain number of people. So in closed spaces, the easiest, the safest assumption is, yes, you're predisposed to catching the infection, even if you're 6 feet away, because it will be airborne, it will be recirculated air, And if you're in the same house, the best advice is to keep the windows open.
Well, that's terrifying in some way, Dr. Brahmi, because what you're saying is that if the virus is still active, wherever I go, if I walk into a restaurant, if I walk into a store, if I walk into anywhere, that I have to be damn careful because I'm not sure if maybe somebody don't even physically see has been exposed, and there are microscopic droplets in the air. We have to be that careful.
Exactly, because anytime you're indoors, you have to wear a mask for your own safety.
Well, do you wear a mask at home?
No, because there is nobody at home who has infection. If you know there is an infection, then obviously you should. But
Okay.
not at home.
Okay.
Anytime you have in public spaces where there are multiple people, the safest strategy is to put the mask on.
Right, right. And as long as we're talking about masks, since you're in the medical field, now I'm wearing a cloth mask that a friend of mine gifted me, and I'm very happy and I was flattered that that he gifted it to me. But it's just a cotton mask. I mean, do you have any recommendations on what kind should we all be wearing these N95 masks?
There have been a lot of research studies about the constitution of the masks. So the medical masks have 3 layers, and they are much more effective than the cloth masks. So for a cloth mask to be effective, it has to have 3 layers, and it will diminish the chances of viral exchange by 50 or 60%. The N95 you mentioned, they are 95% effective. The regular hospital masks or the medical masks are about 60% effective. So there was an interesting twist. There was another study that came out a few days ago that people, when they use the neck gaiters on their face to protect from the virus, actually end up disseminating it further. They looked at the bandanas or the neck gaiters, which are double layered, and they saw with the laser estimation of the size of the emissions actually went farther and hung in the air longer.
Wow.
And they theorized that it's conceivably because the neck gaiter, 2-layered cloth cover actually helps break the droplets into aerosols, and thus they're able to disseminate further and faster. So that was kind of counterintuitive, but the take-home message is that the mask should have 3 layers.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, that's good advice. Hey, what happened? Let me go back, if you don't mind, since we're talking about the first day of this excessive heat wave. I mean, a few months ago, even the president was saying, well, the virus won't do well in heat. And of course, when you live in Bakersfield, we were cheering that on, thinking, okay, well, maybe we'll get a break from it here. Well, it not only has not taken a break, but it seems to have just ramped up. What was that early study that seemed to indicate that heat could be our friend?
It wasn't early study; it was early hope, because the flu virus subsides in the summertime, and we were just hoping through association that we may be fortunate enough that the heat will have the same impact. But it became paradoxical, as you see, that the heat is driving people indoors, and when they're congregating indoors, they're actually reinforcing the spread of the infection. So the heat that was supposed to work in our favor actually worked against us.
Okay. Wow. So it wasn't a study, it was hope. That's so... the one thing that's as an aside, Dr. Bombi, we're talking to Dr. Bridge Bombi of Centric Health, is to this day how little we know or how much we're learning as this thing goes on. If you go back to late February and the 1st of March and you look at all the assumptions we had then and what we know now, it's amazing how much we've learned, is it not? Yeah.
Absolutely so. This virus has such heterogeneous presentations, so the modes of spread, how just a few people are super spreaders, 10 or 20% spread all the infection, other 80% don't. The chronic lingering consequences from COVID fog to chronic fatigue syndrome to pulmonary fibrosis. It's an amazingly diverse virus. And yes, you're right. There's a lot to learn, but our learning curve has been rather steep, and we have learned a lot.
Oh, that's good. Hey, Doctor, I had read something about cross immunity. Can you explain what cross immunity is and how it applies in this case?
So we talked about immunity in the past. One is the innate that the body has and is able to ward off the infections. Second is the adapted immunity. When an infection occurs, the body adapts to that and creates antibodies and T cells that retain the memory. So the cross immunity is if there's a sister virus, then you have partial exposure to that virus, and that will help lessen the adverse consequences of an infection. A classic example is smallpox virus lessens the impact of measles virus. Another thing is BCG. The BCG is the anti-tuberculosis vaccination. And they are doing a study in Australia to see if BCG vaccination actually works, at least partially, against the coronavirus. So that provides a partial immunity, a cross immunity. You had exposure to one pathogen, but the immune generation from that pathogen is partially neutralizing the coronavirus or other virus. So that's the cross immunity.
I had no idea. That's interesting. And are there any kind of cross immunities that show promise?
A couple, the BCG and polio. So the new polio vaccinations seem to help against the coronavirus and the BCG vaccination. Also, the study came from La Jolla, where they looked at the blood samples from 2015 to 2018, and they found that about 50% of the people had the T cell or memory cell cross-reactivity with coronavirus, suggesting that the cold coronaviruses that we have, 3 or 4 that have been around for ages, they may be cross-reacting with the coronavirus and providing partial immunity in some people.
Huh. Wow. There was a big hullabaloo earlier this week when Vladimir Putin announced that Russia had not only developed a vaccine, but was already administering it, and I believe he said one of his daughters had administered. What do you make of that? And is there any way for the West to know what's in this vaccine or any way to corroborate its efficacy?
I think that's a very interesting development. So if you go back in April 20, they enacted a legislation in Russia that phase 3 trials are not necessary. So let me just walk you through a quick review of the vaccine development.
Okay. All right.
Typically, we have a pathogen. We inject it in primates, in monkeys, and see if we are able to generate a vaccine. We inject the vaccine to the pathogen in animals, monkeys, primates, and see if there is immune response that produces neutralizing antibodies. And then we go to the phase 1, where a small number of people, 50 to 100, are injected to, 1, see safety, 2, dose determination, 3, see if there is any efficacy, there is an immune response. So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is larger. You see in larger segment of people, the same 3 things, but more the efficacy side, if there are neutralizing antibodies. So the third phase is the real phase. That's the crucible where the virus either fails or succeeds. That's where most of the vaccines fail in the third stage, third phase, because that's when a large number of people are recruited, and you look for the side effects. 1, you need to have efficacy. 2, lack of side effects or presence of safety, because when you deal with a virus that has about 20% cases go to the hospital, 5% end up in ICU, and less than 1% die. So when you have less than 1% mortality of coronavirus, the last thing you want to do is inject people with a vaccine that hasn't been thoroughly vetted and can actually exacerbate the problem. So to take it's a leap of faith. What they have done is they have taken chances. They never published the data. We don't know phase 1 data. We don't know phase 2 data. They never did the phase 3. So they have taken this leap of faith based on, I guess, the animal research that somehow this is going to work. And if they really believed in that, Richard, they wouldn't be doing cyber hacking while they're simultaneously allegedly exposing people to vaccine. They're also cyber hacking our research. If you're so confident, why would you do that? So that's a mystery. The time will resolve. But he did brand it a Sputnik moment, so it's a Sputnik 5. So we'll see if it's a Sputters or it's a Sputnik. We don't know yet.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, so is in Western societies, I suppose, or across the world, is the protocol to have that third trial phase where you test it on a mass scale? Do any other countries eliminate that like Russia did?
China did for its military. In June this year, China, I guess that's another way of doing a phase 3 trial. It's about the value of human life. If you don't value human life, you take chances. They must have done some projections. We're going to lose a few people. Who cares? The vaccine works. So, but the standard of care across the world, and that includes China and Russia, has been large, long-term phase 3 trials that determine both the efficacy and assure the safety of the results. Because if, as we discussed, if in the presidential elections there is any fear of politicization or accelerating a vaccine in an unsafe manner, that can backfire in a number of ways.
Oh, wow. Good Lord. Man, we're going to run out of time. I want to save, there's two topics I want to save for next week. One are some of the non-COVID healthcare consequences and how telemedicine could change because of COVID. But the final question would be this. There's a new study from New York City on the mortality comparison with the 1918 pandemic. Can you talk about that?
So that's an interesting. There's a gentleman who's an ear physician in, I think, Brigham Young in Massachusetts. So he did the study. Basically, in 2018, the New York had 5.5 million people, and now we have 8.9 or some 9 million people. So if you look at the mortality between March and May, about similar number of people died with the influenza virus, H1N1 virus in 1918 and in 2020 with the coronavirus. So there was similar mortality, not quite the same, up to 70%. But the concern was compare 2020 to 1918. 2020, our healthcare system is so much improved. In 1918, we had nothing. We didn't even have penicillin. We had no concept of hygiene. So the fact that there is similar mortality in today's enhanced medicine, then we probably are in the first inning of seeing mortality across the globe because the lethality of it in New York is similar to 1918 in the presence of a much evolved healthcare system.
Huh. Wow. Good Lord. Is New York beyond this? Is New York in good shape right now?
Right now they're in good shape, but as we open, there will be, it's a whack-a-mole. It's happening again in Europe, Australia, even New Zealand, in Hong Kong, Germany, everywhere. So you open up, the virus will re-emerge. For now, they are safe. So that's why you never let go on the safety precautions. The best protection is safety precautions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. 2:27. We're out of time. We got some good stuff to talk about next week. I want to thank you for coming on again, Dr. Bridgebaum. You're keeping us in. I love having you on because we cut through all the BS and just talk about the facts. Sir, have a good weekend and stay cool.
And stay cool, yeah.
Okay, buddy. All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.